I'm Laura. Welcome. We have a full house tonight. And I know you can be doing a lot of other things rather than being here tonight, that you're here. Thank you very much for coming. We appreciate you being here to support the gallery and to support the artists. Just had a lovely group of kids come in. Oh my God, I live for that. I'm sorry. During the week when I'm here, a lot of times the kids come in from school, and I love having the kids in the neighborhood, that the schools come into the gallery and enjoy the space. So we're going to start off tonight. Joelle Lopez is going to be moderating the artist talk. I just want to introduce the artists who are all part of the show. We have Joe Woods.
How's everybody doing today?
Good.
Hey. Justin Francesco.
How are you guys?
Brian Small. Walter Altamirano.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming.
Seven.
Peace.
Nick Luciano. And Jerome China.
Thank you for coming out.
Now, all the work that's on the wall is available for sale. So at the end of the talk, if you're interested in any pieces that you see, let me know. We also have a payment plan available. You can do that as well. And we'll get started with the talks. Oh, one more thing. We have our anniversary show coming up on February 15th. So I'm inviting everyone who's here to come out and support us. We're going to be 1 year at the space. February 15th. From 6 to 10 p.m. So you're all invited, and I hope to see you there. Thank you. Joelle?
Thank you, Laura. An artist. Don't worry, we have security. Let's keep it real. My name is Joel Lopez. I'm an artist as well as a curator here in Newark. I know most of these artists. Two of them I just met today, but hopefully we could, they could share about their process and practice, and we get to know them before we buy the artwork. So let's start with Joe Wood, because Joe is the first artist when you walk in to the left, those big, colorful pieces. Let's just start with Joe. Just tell us about you, where you're from, and just a little bit about your practice.
No problem. I'm originally from Pittsburgh, PA. Go Steelers.
Giant.
Bye.
Meet me after. Now I reside in Elizabeth, New Jersey. I am a graphic designer, painter, illustrator, and a graphic design teacher for autistic students. The stuff you see over there are heavily influenced by pop art, abstract, graffiti, and the love of Black women. Most of the stuff over there, the Afro-punk, I pay homage to that. If you can see it in the work, the nose rings and things of that nature, different color hair and things. I guess I really take my time when I do it, kind of like a graffiti artist. They usually sketch it out, make color, and then when they go to get to work, they have it with them. I do the same thing. I'm not really a muralist. You won't see my work as huge pieces, but like I said, I always have a sketch with me, and then I put it up there. I'm meticulous in what I do. I like to have things crisp, very clean when I work. And if it's not right, I'm not putting it up. It has to look exactly how I drew it out first. If not, then I'm not putting it up. As you can see, I'm influenced with my graphic design work. My teachers tell me you have to draw somebody's eye in. If you're not catching their eye, then you didn't do your job. And when you come in, I hope when you see that, you stop and look, you walk, you come back, you look at it again. If I did that, then I did my job. Same thing, I worked in the newspaper business for numbers of years, and that's the first thing you do. You you have to draw someone's eye in order to pick up the newspaper and turn the page. And that's what I do with my work. If I'm not catching your eye, then I fail.
Is this the first series you've done? Is this the first set of series?
It's the first series, yes.
Okay. So they're all women, it's not all women? Now, this is your first major show?
Yes.
Okay, it's first time?
Yeah.
Okay. But you also run a company as well that showcase artists.
Yes. It's called Funk Studios Control the Cool. I do it every month. I try to showcase local artists. I have it down in North New Jersey, and I have artists come in. They don't pay for anything. I'm just here to showcase so people can get a chance to see them. You know, whatever they sell, they keep 100% of what they sell. And that's just what I do. I love art that much that I just want you to come in, you know, get the exposure that they want, that they need. Because some people don't have that avenue. You know, when I first started really getting into the scene, you know, I was trying to pick Mr. Spalt's brain, you know, like, how do you get into these galleries? You know, it's like, man, I got some stuff to show. How do you get your foot in? And I just said, you know what, I'm tired of asking. Let me just create that door for folks to come in. So that's what I did. I've been doing it since last year. Do one every month. Put up an artist call. If you're an artist, come down, I lock you in, I put the show up, I bring people in. You know, folks come in, they enjoy the atmosphere, they enjoy the art, they buy the art. And that's what I'm all about. Like I said, I don't just do art, I love art. As you can see, this is Mr. Cortez's hat right here. I love his work. I had to sport it today, you know, show him off. But that's pretty much what I do.
Now tell us, is a website or?
It's actually YouTube.
Okay.
And if you go to Control the Cool.
Control Cool.
Yeah, Funk Studios Control the Cool, as well as another site called Control the Cool, where actually we do interviews, like we did a couple today, of local artists and so forth, and get them out there as well. So, just check us out.
We'll come back to him. I'm gonna go to Seven God next, because his work is next to Joe's, to your left as you walk in. I don't know much about him, but I know he sold several pieces. And I'm assuming Seven God means 7%, right? No? Okay. Tell me anything about you. I don't know anything about you and where you're from, and
So-
about your practice.
When I say peace, y'all say peace back. Peace.
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 That's how I greet, just to get the energy flowing, that's all. My real name is Hashim Ahmad. I grew up in a Muslim home, and my name means crusher, destroyer of evil, worthy of praise. 7 came from my accident about 4 years ago. I was hanging with a group of my friends. I came home from college. I was a school teacher. I also had my own clothing brand at the time. Kind of struggling in between life, having an entry-level job, having a newborn son, and a daughter when I left college. I came back home and it was kind of rough for me. So I went back to my old neighborhood, started doing things I'm not really proud of, and I was hanging with my friends and they slipped me something. When they slipped me something, it created a chemical imbalance, and I've been diagnosed for the last 5 years with schizophrenic bipolar. When I had my accident, I kept seeing 7. I kept seeing it, I kept writing it. I never knew what it meant. The only thing that I was really educated about was self-knowledge, Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X. My mom is really, really spiritual. I come from a really, really deep cultural home in a sense, where she really praises culture and like giving back into the community, valuing the black dollar. So when I had my out-of-body experience, I seen things on a whole different frequency and a whole different dimension, and it blew my mind. It blew my mind till I was super scared, and I didn't know what 7 was, but when I came back to consciousness, I took 7. It took me a long time to really digest what it was, because I was very afraid to even go near it. I was afraid of, I kept seeing it, so eventually I studied it, and 7 is my fear, and it's my rebirth. It's my fear because I was very scared of it, but I took my fear and I became my fear and I embodied it. 7 is a number of God. 7 is a number of completion. A lot of religious texts use 7 in their religions as different, I guess, meanings and stuff like that. But for me, it also represented the time I was in the hospital. My daughter was 7 years old, and they told me that I wasn't going to make it. When I had my out-of-body experience during my accident, I can go so deep into the story, but it's so long. But I had so many different things happen to me that I really didn't have no control over, and yeah, that's it for us. That's where 7 comes from. That's where 7 comes from. I'm from Wilmington, Delaware, native of Wilmington, Delaware. I got into art maybe about 2-3 years ago. It's really new to me. I'm not really used to doing art. I've always been used to expressing myself, but never used to painting or anything like that. My accident allowed me to tap into a different mind. It allowed me to express myself. For a long time, I was very afraid to talk to people. I was having a lot of different trauma happen to me. I didn't know how to communicate that. So my mentor was like, listen, you're having these outbursts. You know, I was snapping on people. I believe they called it, what's the word they call it in mental illness? They call it, I forget, but for lack of terms that I can't find, I'm just gonna say I was having different outbursts and stuff like that, that I really couldn't control my anger, I couldn't control my thoughts. And my mentor was like, Hashim, I need you to, start expressing yourself a little bit more differently because I don't want to see you lose your talent. At that time, I had a clothing brand and I had my own store. I lost all that. I lost my kids, I lost my store, I lost my job. I hit rock bottom. I was even homeless for a while. And around that 2-year period, I stayed in the house and I started painting. So painting to me is like a yoga, like a meditation. If you look at my pieces, you'll see a lot of symbolisms and markings on there, and that represents my divine language. My divine language is a language that we all speak in a sense. It's your energy signature. Before you walk in the room, somebody say, wow, I like his vibe, I like his energy. Because the first language that we all speak universally is energy. Without opening up your mouth, just your swag and your aura, that's your energy. So when I'm creating, I go into a deep meditation, and I start speaking within, and those markings, those symbols are what I call my divine language. And they are on my jacket and on my throat too. So, yeah.
Okay.
That was a lot.
I know we have a lot of questions. We're gonna wait till the end, please. But just what are some of your influences as far as artists?
I never really studied art. The 2 years I was in my little, I guess, cocoon, you would say, it really was trying to figure out what happened, what I seen. So I really was just trying to depict. And at first I hated art. I'm not good at this. This I can't sell this. There's no way somebody gonna buy this bull stuff. Nah. And so it's a space in Wilmington, Delaware called the Creative Vision Factory. I stayed in there for about 1.5 years, and I learned to develop my style and just built my confidence. And the person that was working next to me, his name was Carl. He's like, yo, I love what you're doing. He said it reminds me of ancient Egypt and it reminds me of caveman paintings. He tells me that my work is very universal because it could be understood on a global scale. And even speaking to me like that, I'm like, yeah, all right, whatever. I didn't believe it. I'm like, man, this ain't nobody gonna buy no scribbles, whatever.
So what did it take when you start believing in yourself?
I had my first exhibition, I believe, 2018, and before the show started, I had a huge print I made, and at this time I was doing a baby angel at the time. I like to draw characters to represent narration, so at this time I was doing a baby angel, and I blew it up super big. It was like one of the biggest pieces in the exhibition. The guy walked in and was like, I want it. I'm like, okay. My sister's husband said, I want it too. He was like, all right, we'll bid for it then. It's like, I already bid. 500, 300. They kept going back and forth. The bid in $1,000. And before could step into this art world. I sold a $1,000 piece in my first show. And then I want to say, not to even speak about money, but my first exhibition, I made over $3,000 less than 3 hours.
Yeah.
That was more than it was more than confidence. It showed me that I didn't have to be afraid to express myself, and I don't have to doubt myself anymore. Like I never took a $1,000 T-shirt, so I'm like, yeah, this the lane I'm supposed to be. This is the lane. This the lane. But yeah, I looked at Jean-Michel Basquiat, Andy Warhol, Keith Haring, but I actually never studied their work. I'm intrigued by them as creatives, but I'm more inspired by people, places, and things. Like having a conversation, walking past a homeless person, and he spits some kind of knowledge that makes my day. Like I'm more inspired by life. I love doing abstract work, kind of like what Joe was saying. Like in my pieces, you might walk past something, you see something, then you walk past it again, you see something different. I like the mystery and making people think. Just them being curious, like what is that? People walk past, I see a dog. Do you see a dog? Well, I see a cat. Do you see a cat? I don't know. It's your interpretation. So I love that. I'm not really big on realism, because I feel like that's like really easy, taking a picture, like looking at something and drawing it in a sense. I'm really intrigued with like abstract art and mixed media. So that's like kind of like, I guess, would be my influence in a sense. But like I said, I never really was a student of art. I'm self-taught, so I don't come from an art background. I don't come from art school. I don't even know all the technical blending. I just know that I had a real high taste level as a child, so I know how to blend and mix colors just organically. Cause somebody asked me the same thing. They said, how are you able to blend the way you blend, or how you able? I'm like, I just organically, it comes out that way. It's just how I express myself. So yeah.
Well, some of the better artists are outside. They call them outsiders, or they call they call us outsiders.
Oh, right.
We don't have the degrees and all that knowledge, but those are the better artists in our history, actually.
Deep.
Basquiat, for instance, and
Right.
Martin, you were talking about Keith,
Yeah.
you know, Frida, right? So these are artists that they have the training, but those were MFAs. You guys are awesome. Please, I say nothing bad about you guys. I understand that. Thank you. We'll come back to some questions, I'm sure.
Okay.
I want to talk to Walter, because we're coming this way. We skip. Yeah, he's back over here. We skip Jerome, but we'll talk to Walter. This is his work here, the abstract work here, and that piece as well. Tell us about you yourself, and you as an artist. You told me a little bit about your history. I think people will be interested in this as well.
Sure. My name is Walter Altamirano. I just want to thank everyone for coming. And I also want to thank Joel for moderating this. And Laura, thank you for putting this together for us. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. So yeah, no, this is my work. You see back here, this is kind of like a trajectory of maybe 6 years of work. As you can see, some of the work that you see, it's abstract, and a lot of the work that I first started working on was very intuitive and emotional. Like I'd just kind of go grab my canvas and get some paint, and I start working, you know, and I had this dialogue between my work and myself. And it's just kind of one of those things where when you put paint down on a blank canvas, it speaks back to me. And as I continue working, I continue developing that painting. And sometimes these paintings can take forever, and sometimes they can happen in a very short period of time. But over the course of time, as I began to study a little bit more about the arts and learning a little bit more about the past masters and stuff like that, and you know, learning from my predecessors, and I had some really good instructors as well. I studied at the Art Students League for a little bit, and I did a lot of representational work there, like figurative work and landscape and outdoor stuff like that. And you start learning about the principles and the fundamentals of art, and those things really, really help anchor you down in terms of, you know, what you can do with a canvas or any other material that you decide to paint on, and use those principles and those rules to kind of give you a guide and a structure. And so when I discovered that, I started realizing that the structure actually liberated me even more, even further, you know, and it made my process a lot more efficient, and it gave me new tools, and it expanded my awareness and my knowledge, and I was able to communicate better, I felt, in terms of what it is I wanted to say. And my art is reflective of my life. You know, it is reflective of who I am. And it's one of those things where it's like intimate to me and it's very personal, And being able to convey what I want to say through a visual representation is something that, for me, I've never experienced anything like it, because prior to getting into art, I was in the business. My background's in corporate finance and international business. And I was trading currencies, and I picked up painting to help me with managing the stresses of currencies and stuff like that, and I discovered this powerful medium. And as I discovered that, I told myself, you know what, I really want to cherish this. I really want to hold on to this, and I want to run with it. And I want to do this long term. This is a lifelong thing. So like, for example, this painting here, the red one that you see here, it's called Ines. So my grandmother, she's from my father's side, and she meant the world to me, and she passed away. But this painting is named after her because when I was creating it, and the experience that I had while I was creating it was something that just, for whatever reason, it really challenged her into me. You know, it was like one of the, remembering her, reminiscing about her and like what she represented and like what she meant to me and what she represented to our family. And when I finished that painting, I was just like, yeah, you know, this is what this is to me. It's like, I gave it her name, you know, Inez. You know, it's just this in the city, you know, and I've had the privilege of being able to travel the world with my beautiful wife, with my parents when I was younger, and I've been able to see all kinds of stuff, and I've been to major cities, and Guayaquil, where my grandmother lived, is a big major city, and I lived in the West Coast, lived in Los Angeles, and now here I'm in New York, and I've been to Seattle, and I've seen all these skylines, and they've always made this big impression on me. Not because of the art, one, because of the architecture, right? You see it's really beautiful, but the people within it. And I did this one, and this one's called City, because for me it's an abstract representation of those experiences that I've had in the past, of visiting these places that house millions of people, you know, and what they represent. And so like you have the one over here, Tango de Amor, which is on the top left, the red one. That one right there is just kind of like, in life has a rhythm, you know. Everyone sees that life has a rhythm to it. But tango is a dance, and you can cut life up how you want it. You walk your life, and you cut that rhythm up, and you make your own beat, you know. And that's what that painting is representative of. So as these paintings go, I can go on and on about every single one of them, but it's, you know, they're representations of my experience in life, you know. And I do my best to represent that through my artwork.
You're an abstract artist, or this is just a series of abstracts?
No, so I prefer abstract art. This is what I like to work in. This is the space I like to work in. I'm also a sculptor. I do marble sculptures as well, and they're also abstract. My training and the exercises that I do is mostly representational. I find that it's a beautiful way it's my way of exercising, you know, and working out my skill sets and sharpening my skill sets and my knowledge and stuff like that. But I prefer abstract.
Now, where's your studio?
It's in Manhattan, so it's up on like 90th and 3rd in Manhattan. So.
Okay. This first time showing in Newark?
Yes, it is my first time showing in Newark. Yeah, and I'm glad to be. This is a wonderful place. I'm happy. Yeah, this is fantastic what Laura has done. I can't believe what she's done with this space and the community, and to be able to come in here and be a part of something that she's just started, and to share my work with you guys. I think it's just fantastic. You know, and I want to support as much as I can. So.
Well, thank you for coming. There's other galleries in Newark, by the way.
Okay, we're good.
Not as good as this one. They're recording it, I'm sorry. The Newark Museum.
I think we would all agree here, yeah.
And the Newark Museum, and there's a lot of great culture here in Newark.
Yeah,
Please come back, yeah.
I would love to.
We'll have more questions for you, but we have to move on.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's talk to Nick. Right where, yeah, we're going that way. Nick's work. Nick, I met Nick at Project for Empty Space, right?
Right,
Justin.
Yeah, Justin.
That's another gallery here in Newark. Project for Empty Space, he had a space there. Tell us more about you, where you're from, and your practice.
I'm from Elizabeth, which is close to here,
Yeah.
neighboring city. And a lot of my work has to do with everything that I feel either too afraid or incapable of saying to people. And I feel that there's a lot of emotion that a lot of men are told is too weak of an emotion, especially from certain generations or certain cultures. Like, I grew up, I'm Italian and Dominican, And my father came here when he was a young child, but a lot of those ideals stuck with him. So growing up, it was a lot of, oh, you know, don't cry, you know, or things like that. But a lot of that emotion, I feel, builds up in people, and they can either express it in a destructive way or in a creative way. And for me, it was to say all of those things that I held in for a while and put it on canvas or wood or make it out of metal. But I'm mostly inspired by music. I do study other artists. I'm a big comic book fan. I grew up reading comic books and really inspired by the work, especially Jack Kirby. But jazz, with the flow of jazz, to me is like painting. So when I paint, I'll listen to, you know, Miles Davis, I'll listen to Dizzy Gillespie, I'll listen to Pat Metheny Group, and then sometimes I'll actually leave a song on for hours, just that song. I know it's annoyed Justin, maybe sometimes, because we used to share a studio together, and my girlfriend Sarah, who I currently share a studio with. Because if I lose track of the idea that I'm trying to put down on canvas, then it's going to warp it completely, and I try to keep it as pure as possible. And also, a lot of my work, the colors, like the bright primary colors, is that I try to associate with the childhood of all viewers. You know, red, blue, yellow being building blocks of all color in any kind of medium, but also closely associated with you know, toys and clothing as a child. So to tap into that part of the mind, that whether or not it's buried or it's something that a lot of people still embrace as adults, I try to communicate with that. And also, a lot of my work is inspired by my Italian roots, and recently I've done a lot of research and a lot of reading on my father's side. So like being Dominican, there's going to be a mixture of African culture and European culture and then the Taino natives. So I try to blend influence of all those cultures in my work, especially indigenous work. Because that speaks.
You have your studio now in Passaic?
Passaic, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's,
I'm laughing because it's a very big Dominican community,
right.
so you don't have a choice.
That's actually, I got the studio in Passaic because it's where my girlfriend Sarah was living at the time, and that's where she's from. But Passaic and Newark and Elizabeth, to me, are these beautiful cities that have so much culture. Especially Passaic, Newark as well. You know, being the bigger city next to Elizabeth, where I grew up, and my grandparents would always tell me this was the place to go. You know, when you were younger, this is where you went out to listen to the musicians, to see the artists, to, you know, go to the different clubs. You know, Newark was, for people around here, and who knew, this was New York. And it was a big culture capital in this area. But also Passaic, because Passaic, even though it has areas, it's still not heavily gentrified, so the culture and the people are still there, so it has character. You know, and that's what I like about at least this area of Newark and where my first studio was. Like closer towards Penn Station, it's a lot of Whole Foods and Chipotle and, you know, bigger, glassier buildings.
Starbucks, yeah.
Right, exactly. And
Which I love.
and a lot of that does bleed into my work, especially, like I said, my music influence being jazz. Jazz is a very, you know, urban music where it was born. It was born, you know, from blues. But films, my favorite films all take place in cities. Whether it's in Japan or New York or somewhere in California, it's this idea that we live almost in a hive, in a tight community. And like one of my pieces, She Who Lives in the City, the idea is just somebody finding themselves within this community of millions.
Now, do you have a name for your style? Because it's kind of representational slash abstract slash other stuff?
Uh,
Do you have a name for it? I mean,
No,
okay.
people ask me all the time,
Okay.
and not to sound pretentious, I just don't know what to call it. I mean, I would definitely say it's influenced by pop art, especially with like hard lines, bright colors. But like I said earlier, comic book work.
Okay.
You know, when I was a kid, that was my main source of visual art.
Now, this is the first time showing in Newark?
No, I've been showing with Joe for the past couple months.
Other shows.
For his shows, yeah. And here, I can't remember.
Well, at a major gallery in Newark. You show in events, places, right?
Like events, yeah, so this is probably the first major time, yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you. You have 3 more artists, the talkers. Y'all ready for the talkers?
Yeah.
We stay the,
Let's go with Brian first, because I got to use the
no,
bathroom.
you last.
Oh, damn.
You knew what I was talking about. Let's talk about Jerome.
He just went to the bathroom.
I'm sorry, Jerome, I'm sorry, Brian. This is Brian Smalls. His work is, I guess, small, I'm not gonna ask. The alcohol inspired,
pieces,
and then these 2 over here.
yes.
I know Jerome, so let me see. Well, tell us about you, Jerome, and then where you're from.
Jerome is in the bathroom.
I'm sorry.
Okay, I'll tell you who I am because he can't remember.
I've known Brian for years.
So I am Brian,
Brian.
not Jerome.
Jerome.
I'm Bryant Small. I work in Alcohol Inc. And what that is, it's a high pigmented dye that when it comes into contact with 91% rubbing alcohol, it causes the inks to move around. It's similar to watercolor, except instead of water, it's rubbing alcohol. So it smells really bad, typically, but I'm kind of immune to it and don't really smell it anymore. I've tried to paint with tequila before, wine, it does not work. So that's one of the questions that will come up, it doesn't work. It's not high enough proof. I need to get some Everclear or something like that and try that, or moonshine to see if it will work. I haven't tried it yet, but I will. But alcohol ink works best on non-porous surfaces, glass, metal, tile, but the surface for these pieces here are Yupo paper. And what that is, it's plastic paper or synthetic paper made of like plastic bottles or plastic materials, and they've melted, they've made them into pellets and melted those pellets down into sheets and made them into a synthetic paper. So the inks that you're seeing are sitting on the surface of the paper. So it doesn't absorb, and so that's why the colors are so vibrant, because they're sitting on the surface of the paper. So if they weren't behind the glass, you would actually be able, if you put your hand on the pieces, you could feel the texture of the inks. The surface is really, really smooth, and it almost feels like the closest surface that I could think of would be like a photo paper. We talked about this. It would be like a photo paper. And so it's really smooth and slick on both sides of the paper. But all my work really is driven by color. So often I'm asked about what inspires my work. It really starts with color because the work itself, the medium itself is unpredictable. When I start painting, I don't know what's gonna happen. The inks could either all run together and become like this muddy brown, which I call depression brown, that I'm not able to like work myself out of, because once all the ink runs together, it becomes like this brown that I can't lighten up. So I'm always trying to avoid getting that. I paint flat, and so gravity can come into play, the humidity in the air, everything plays a role in what's happening. And I always say it's like a dance. Sometimes the inks get to lead, sometimes I get to lead. And I paint with music, so it's interesting to hear Nick talk about the music playing a role in what happens. I'm not listening to jazz, I'm usually listening to like house or dance music or something to kind of bring about lively mood. I'm always painting from a happy place. So if I'm in a bad mood, I don't paint because I want my work to show exactly who I am. And I'm usually in a good mood and in a good space. And so I want that to be reflected in my work, even if it's dark in tone or the mood of the piece that has nothing to do with what I'm feeling in my spirit. It may just be, I want to play around in dark colors that day. But when I put work out, it has nothing. I don't put any darkness, any bad stuff in my work. It doesn't come from that place. Some artists work out the bad stuff through their work. I just don't come from that place. So that's it.
Where are you from?
I'm originally from Washington, D.C., but I have been in the New York area for 24 years. I came here for school and never left. I went to FIT for advertising and marketing, so I have a foot in both worlds. I still work my corporate gig all day. I still work full-time. I still do art full-time. I always say I am not in the business of being a starving artist. So I am always thinking about art as a business. I run my art like a brand. And so I am always busy. Yeah, they're running at the same time, always. So I'm always working very hard. My brain is always in 3 different places. And I always have coffee.
What are some of the tools you use? I know you did a demonstration and one time you used a straw and you were doing thing.
Yeah, rarely do I use a straw anymore because I just run out of breath because I tend to work larger now, but I paint with everything around me. So in my studio space, whether it be at home or like I have a residency at Mana Contemporary now, everything around me has ink on it. So if it's a water bottle, a wine bottle, a sandal, a plastic fork, anything that's in my space is opted to have ink on it. Like, period, because I can use it to imprint, to move the inks around. I use everything. So nothing is off limits. If you don't want ink on it, don't bring it into the space. Like that's literally what it is. If you've been to my studio space, you will see random things there, from fly swatters to like long plastic rolls to like really random things. You're like, why is that here? Or why do you own that thing? It's like, because it's something that I paint with.
What about the materials besides ink?
I often will play around with raw pigments. I play around with putting glitter into my work. I like a little sparkle. I will put glitter in my work. I will do pigments. Often I will go in and detail work once it's dry with acrylic to play around with depth and bringing stuff to the foreground, pushing stuff back. Trying to build layers. That's something that alcohol ink works similar to watercolor, that it has a tendency to go flat. And so I'm always trying to create dimension. So I use plastic, foil, anything that doesn't absorb, I use.
You mentioned Mana, right?
Mhm.
You have a residency in Mana. When is the open doors, or is there Mana? Tell people, tell the audience about Mana.
So Mana Contemporary is a huge complex that houses a number of galleries, of private collections in Jersey City. 888 Newark Avenue in Jersey City, not far from Journal Square, it's walking distance, about 4 blocks from Journal Square, that has about 300 or more artist studios, as well as private galleries that hold like the original silk screens of Andy Warhol, his original collection of like the Campbell's Soup silk screens, which blew my mind when I went in there to see those. Several different, there's actually several small museums inside of Mana that you're able to go into and see do tours. It's open tours. There's a open studio that happens, I think it's happening in May, where it's open to the public. All of the artists that opt to open their studios, you're able to come in and take a tour and do purchasing, everything for some extremely famous artists are in Mana Contemporary. I'm part of a residency program, the Eileen S. Kaminsky Family Foundation. She does a residency for between 6 and 8 artists from around the world each season to bring them in to paint and create for a season and support those artists, giving them exposure to galleries throughout the city, throughout the world, having people come in, do artist tours, visits, review our portfolios, etc. And the public is able to come in at any given time to visit our studios and see the collections that we're working on, etc. All at Mana Contemporary. And they do tours, I believe it's Tuesday through Fridays at 3 o'clock. So if you ever have a day off during the week, come and take a tour, because there's some amazing stuff in there.
Thank you.
No
Thank you
problem.
for that.
And I tried to keep it short, but you
No,
did.
no, you got it. We're right on time. For Justin, our young artist, I'm proud of you, Justin. His work is right next to Brian, no, Jerome, and the little Mickey Mouse or Minnie Mouse, right?
Sure.
Whichever, and the one on top of the mantle.
And the big piece too.
No, and 2 of those pieces have been sold. One was sold today. So congratulations.
Thank you.
And congratulations, Akwaaba. Tell us about you. Where you from? And I know you're a student at Kane, right?
Yes,
And majoring in art.
art education. So I was born in Rahway, New Jersey, and I was raised between Elizabeth and Cranford, New Jersey. A lot of my work is done with a variety of mixed media. It could be spray paint, acrylic paint, oil paint, collage, garbage. That particular painting has cut up phone cords, tin foil, you name it. My work definitely draws from as far as Italian futurism to Cubism to 1980s street graffiti from New York City, New Jersey specifically. Along with Nick Luciano, I studied under Jerry Gann, if you guys are familiar. He transitioned in 2018, but he was a very famous New York-based artist. I'm actually at Kane University right now for art education. I'm hoping to teach in high school level, middle school level. I want to educate the future about how important art is as just a vehicle for expressing yourself, because a lot of kids, we did a study, and most kids, they stop after 3rd grade creating, and it's usually because of a bad teacher, and I don't want to be that reason for kids. And then a lot of kids, they don't continue it, and they repress those emotions for the rest of their lives. So art is definitely a very powerful tool to let kids, because kids have a lot of pent up stuff inside, because they're still learning who they are,
Well, tell us
Yeah.
about your art.
Yeah.
What is inspiration, or do you have inspiration, or what motivates you?
Well, what motivates me is definitely spirituality and vibrations that people give off in society, specifically in a very densely packed state like New Jersey. We're constantly, like, I'm right here bumping shoulders and elbows with people, and everybody is literally a visual representation of stories, cultural traditions, personalities that are all going inside one's head at the same time. So when you're rubbing elbows with people, you're really rubbing elbows with these densely complicated conceptions, which are people. I find that society is also very interesting. You could walk down the street, for instance, and the amount of people who've lived and died in that area, and just those spiritual energies that are still left behind generation after generation. I find that my work is very dense, just like that. When I grew up in Elizabeth, our street was very, very densely packed. Like, you had 3 family homes, and then you're bumping elbows all the time. So it's definitely yeah, it's.
Yeah, so you also do sculptures, correct?
I do some sculptures, yeah.
No, the
Not as
Mickey
much
Mouse.
as the paintings.
I'm sorry.
Not as much as the paintings. I definitely do some sculptures though.
Now, did you cast that? Is that Mickey Mouse or Minnie Mouse? I'm not sure.
So I actually bought that at a thrift store, and it's called the Culture Idol, and it represents how it's also a piggy bank, which I think is very funny. People constantly throw all their money into pop culture and not notice. For instance, you could buy the next Kanye album, but you won't buy a friend's album who, you know, you could have known for like 10, 15 years. So that's literally a representation of just dumping money into these cultural idols that we kind of have. Like, when people see the Mickey Mouse ears, they automatically, you know. So
It's almost like artists buying your work.
essentially, yeah.
I'm saying that because another bought that page, another artist bought that page. Which is, but thank you, both artists for. Jerome, I'm kidding. Brian bought that page, which I'm so proud of. That's great. I love buying art from other artists as well. I tell the story all the time. My friend Ronnie Gilbert, who has transitioned as well, had a collection of, 20 artists from North. He transitioned, he left it to his daughter. And in that collection, he has Von Spam, he has, what's his name, Jerry Gant. Many, many giants here in North. And I'm sure that collection is worth over 100,000, I'm sure, easy, or even more, who knows. So buy some work from your friends, please. Everyone. So
Buy something from me. Why don't you?
let's talk.
And then I can buy something from them.
I'm working on buying something from Justin. Tell us more about any color theories, or I just think your work is so there's so much energy.
Yeah,
And-
so actually you got me out with this a little bit. Just studying at Grumbacher, basic color wheel, I realized that some paintings that I was doing were too densely packed with one particular color. So to kind of alleviate that, I would pick, say, blue, purple, and then one other, and try and do all the different shades and tints of that. So you get a little bit of variety, but you're not too, overwhelmed with color. I think that's funny to say because my work is so dense and there's a lot going on, but I like considering it organized chaos, because that's really, specifically New Jersey, New York metropolitan area, that's what we live in, organized chaos, and just being so densely packed,
Okay. Well, thank you. You're doing good. One final artist. Your own China is, his sculptures are in the windows. All these sculptures here. Except for okay.
It's always good to have that.
Jerome, tell us about you, where you're from, as far as your work, your studio, and tell us what inspired you to do these beautiful sculptures.
So I'm originally from a place in Richmond, Virginia called Churchill. It's kind of like the western part of the city. I could say I'm from Richmond, Virginia, but Richmond, Virginia is pretty big, and I like to talk about where I'm from locally. So locally, I'm from a park called Churchill. I currently live in Jersey City. That's where my studio is. I got into the art world about 7 years ago. Went to a metal sculptor's. I went to a commercial shop. They were welding. They were making artwork out of the metal, and it just intrigued me that they were able to take something so seemingly so indestructible and basically turn it into like anything that they wanted. So that was the thing that intrigued me, and that's kind of like how I got started. I dabbled in art, but nothing to this magnitude. Normal stuff that people would do, paper mache, that kind of thing. So this is my first what I would consider serious endeavor into fine arts. More? Give me a second.
He has more, trust me.
So
this is what you do for a living now, or just your full-time artist?
I knew that question was kind of. When I was driving over here, and I was like, someone's going to ask, are you a full-time artist? And I don't always know the relevance of that question. When I'm doing art, I'm doing it full-time.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I just know you sell a lot of work, that's what I'm saying.
Well, thank you. I've been really fortunate. You know, one of the things that's interesting that Brian brought up is, you know, how he treats his art as a business. When I first started doing this, you know, I think of, you know, artists as, you know, these free-wheeling, free-flowing, you know, kind of creatures, you know, like 60s, you know, love, peace, and good vibration. And then once I got into the game, I'm like, shit, this is like corporate America. There's some, these people will slit your throat, literally. So, so that actually made me start it. I look at this as a business, and you know, and when I started doing this, I started doing it as a hobby until someone purchased a piece of work for $250, and I'm like, so you know, maybe I could like sell this, and then I bought my first piece home, and you know, my largest support is my wife, and you know, I think she has like really good taste in art. So when I brought her home and she was blown away by the first piece, I kind of like figured that I had something. So, you know, she gave me an opportunity to, you know, kind of, you know, not worry about money and finances and be able to pursue this to see what I could actually like make out of it. So, you know, now I look at the artwork that I create and that other artists create. I look at it as what I would consider cultural currency. And what I mean by that is that, you know, the artwork that we're creating, you know, when we're dead, this artwork is going to still be around. And when I think about cultural currency, the only way that we're going to know that a culture exists is through the artwork or the arts. You know, so whether that's, you know, pottery, painting, sculpture, film, music, that's the only way that you know a culture exists. So that's why when there are wars, one of the first things that people go after to destroy is museums. And there's a reason for that. You're literally destroying a person's culture. So I take a look at art as cultural currency, and once I realized art was that for me, it started turning into like a serious endeavor. You know, so when I'm creating things, you know, when I'm doing a weld on something, all of my metal it's welded steel. So when I'm welding, I'm thinking now, because when I first started, I just wanted to learn how to weld and just, you know, get the thing on the thing, you know. And then, you know, and then until it hits the floor and it all breaks apart, you know. So now when I'm looking at welding, I'm looking at, if I do this particular weld, is this going to last the next 300 years? So that's how I'm approaching this now. And I was on the train and I was like, well, you know, why were you kind of drawn to metal? Yeah, because there's a lot of mediums out there, you know, painting. Well, I don't have to name them. There's a lot of other things other than metal sculpture. And, you know, when I started to think about, you know, this whole thing, it always brings me back to, you know, having, you know, African queens and kings and princes and princesses board here on a slave ship. And when I take a look at that and like the apparatuses that held them in bondage, you know, the iron collars, the chains, the shackles. And it started to dawn on me, like, you know, maybe, you know, back there somewhere and through me now, maybe that's the thing that drew me to metal in particular, because now I have the skill set to shape it and change it and make it into something beautiful and something that's not so oppressive. You know, so, you know, so I'm thinking that, you know, that's kind of, you know, why I'm a sculptor. In addition that, you know, I can bury this in the ground for like the next 100 years, you dig it up and it's still the thing.
Now your process, going back to when you're starting a piece, do you sketch out the image, or you just let the metal take shape?
Probably someday my sketches will be worth more than my artwork, because I do so few of them. So if you want to buy sketches, let me know. So I very rarely go into the studio with like a sketch in mind. So there are some things I sketch out, but more so I just work kind of intuitively, because most of the artwork here, it's all found metal. When I got into this thing, I decided that I'm going to ban any art form that I deem too expensive. So I started working in scrap metal. So, going in with an idea, if you don't have that particular piece, that idea could take a long time to come to fruition.
And you have, and that thing just really never gets out of your head. And it can almost, to some degree, depending on who you are, it can stop you from creating. Because you're stuck on this particular idea. It has to be this way. There's no flexibility about it. So I generally just try to go in, with a fairly open mind and a bottle and a glass of wine or something. I have a bottle, but I don't drink a whole bottle in the studio. But I try to go in, with like a pretty open mind, and sometimes I'll just, put some stuff on the floor and, just look at it for hours and hours until like something sparks. I started this practice where I call scraps from the table. So I'll put 15 pieces of metal on the table, and I'll force myself to create something out of that, what's on the table. Now in that, I can bend it, I can cut it, but it has to be out of those 15 pieces, because I think that you should be able to make art out of what's available. You can't wait until you get that thing to continue to create. So, and that's actually opened up a lot of things, because I have like a lot of scrap metal. So, focusing on those 15 things it's opened up a whole nother door where, now I feel that my creativity is, fairly unlimited, so.
Is it difficult when people actually for commission piece?
Well, I've actually done very, very few commission pieces. No one has come to me. I actually think it would be really hard for me to do a commission piece. I think I would have to, be the creative director and have someone else fabricate it, because I'm not a really good sketcher, and I have, really no interest in doing that. And most of the commissions that I've had, they've been small commissions, but I have total creative control. So they pay me up front, they get what I deliver. So, but again, they've been small commissions, so no one is like, said, here's $100,000 and I'll just take what you have. But now why I have like this certain amount of control, I'm not interested in having someone I'm doing then doing a $500 commission and someone wants to help design it. That's not gonna happen. So you give me the money, you get what I bring you, and there you go. And I'm able to do that right now. So I'm taking advantage of the things that I can actually do right now, because I don't know when that's going to end. But right now I feel like I'm in total control of what I need to do. And furthermore, in speaking of this as a business, I've always, at some point, I've always gotten into this thing going, how can I get the work to the next level? And what are some of the things that I can do to get to my work to the next level? Because when people buy my work, like Brian was saying, he treats his work as a business and a brand. When people buy my work, I look at it as them buying stock in a company. And for my collectors, I want that stock to rise in value. So what I've begun to do is I'm taking a look at where I want to go as an artist, and all of that other stuff I cut out totally. So if I'm looking at doing a show and that show is not going to get me to where I need to be, I'm not doing that show. I turned down like 3 or 4 shows this year because when I took a look at showing, and it's more to me than just about selling a piece of artwork. I mean, because I sell work. So it's more to me than just selling a piece of artwork. And I'll sell to mostly anybody. But it's more than just being in a show, selling a piece of artwork. It's being in the right show. It's selling work to what I would consider serious collectors, those collectors to some degree that can promote my work. They can share my work with their friends. They can do something at their house with a group of artists. So, I want my work in museums, private public and corporate foundation collections. And that's just the track that I'm on. You know, and again, I've cut out everything that's not leading me to that, because when you guys buy my work, you're obviously buying the work, I think, because you really love it. But on the back end of that, somewhere in the back of your mind, you cannot help but, oh, maybe I got a good deal, maybe this artist is gonna blow up. You know, I don't care if you're thinking that. And I'm thinking that for you. So you know, again, I take a look at it. You know, I treat this. You know, I love doing the work. You know, I totally treat it as a business. You know, I do the work for me. It just so happens that people like the work. So you know, when I'm thinking about doing the work, I'm not thinking about its commercial value. You know, I just do the work. So yeah, that's a mouthful. We just had some new people come in, so I'm going to have to start over.
Well, we're not done. One more portion of the talk. I just want to say that gallery here at Akwaaba show people like Jerome, who is at a certain level, and as well as youngsters, you know, every level of the art world, middle, of course, established, youngsters at the end 7. When I say youngsters, I mean people coming up in the art world. So this is a great gallery for that, show all levels. Some galleries only show certain, you know, and we don't have a chance with those, but Akwaaba provides that opportunity. We have time for some questions for the artists. Any questions to any artist? There you go, we have one.
First of all, I admire your.
He's a what? He's a huge collector.
Anyway,
What's his name?
I admire your uniqueness. Your uniqueness. You come at it from your own personal thing, but then exposure makes you realize that there's somebody out there that is on the same page as you and their lives the same. The question for Justin. We are the proud owners of your piece right here. Oh, yes. We bought it for our own reasons. And I was looking for the connection, which came in one word. You said cubism. We collect, and we have Cuban art in our home. You said cubism.
Yes.
I said, well, there's a connection. I grew up in East Orange. I worked in Manhattan, traveled to Cuba. Density.
Yeah.
We saw it. So we connected. So your uniqueness became my uniqueness, became my wife's uniqueness, became a circle, and it's in our home in about 3 hours. So great, thank you, and I look to talk to you more. I guess to the broad stroke here, your unique exposure says that there's people who are attracted to that uniqueness. Et la, what I'm saying. Either one-on-one or one-on-two, and wife and I, tell me more, because I definitely want more, because we want to know the story behind the story. Density, I appreciate your story, and I relate to it.
So this particular piece is called the Conversationalist. I'm very fascinated with how, when having a conversation with someone, like I stated before, everybody's these complex physical forms with different memories and cultural traditions, and when you're having a conversation with someone, every word is a sensation. So depending what they say and with the energy that's provided to you, whether it's an angry tone, a sad tone, a happy tone, that's all a conversation. And everybody's creating these sensations at all times. Like I'm giving you a sensation right now, speaking to you, projecting energy at you. But yeah, that's the true meaning behind that piece. And it's also when you're in a crowded place, like say you're at Penn Station, and people, it's rush hour, trying to get home, everybody's yelling, people talking to their loved ones on the phone. There's all these conversations going on at a single time, all these energies kind of combating to be heard, you know, to be felt, stuff like that.
I don't believe in shameless plugs, but it's February 22nd. Justin's going to be at a show that I'm curating at Gallery of Faro. So please come.
What's the name?
Gallery of Faro, here in Newark, yeah. 73 Market Street. Justin is one of the many artists and excited for his future. Thank you for buying that piece. You got it for, because you know they grow, everybody grows. Any other questions? Please. All this talent here, beautiful talent.
I have a question for you. I forget what your name is.
This is Joe.
Joe. When you were speaking, it kind of like spoke to me. I'm an artist too, and I'm just now starting out. But you honed in on the fact that you are not going to put out something unless you feel like it's absolutely right. You're like kind of like anal with your art, and I'm the same way. What advice would you give to somebody like me who is anal like that about their artwork? But I think what the issue is sometimes for me is that need for it to be perfect all the time can get in the way of me being creative.
That's a good question. It's kind of a hard question at that. Like I said, I'm always sketching. I'm always sketching till it's right. Then after I sketch it till it's right, then I start to paint. That's the first thing. I get a lot of my creative juices while I'm at work. And I'm always sketching, I'll throw it in the drawer and come back to it later. I'll pick it up, I say, okay, I can fix it some more. And I'm sketching out till it's perfect. Like I say, for me, I always sketch till it's perfect. Till I'm like, okay, this is right. Now I can go to the canvas. Now I can go to the piece of wood and be confident enough to say, okay, it's going to be dope when I put it on a piece of wood because it's dope on a piece of paper. So that's the thing I can tell you. Just sketch it out till you get it right, and then you be confident enough to put it on a piece of canvas.
Can anybody else want to pick that up?
You know,
just some advice.
I'm gonna offer a different perspective. I'm almost the opposite of that, in the sense that you have to know when to stop and when to let some stuff go.
Right.
And at some point, you also have to know that you are not painting for yourself. Because what will happen is you could become an artist that gets so tied to your work that you're not going to be able to sell it. Because it's going to hurt you physically when it sells.
Right.
That's another problem that you could have, is that you will get into shows and you will have to put not for sale because it's going to pain you to let the work go.
Right.
So that's a unique problem. But in terms of like when you're in the creative process, I get to a point, for me, what I try to do is paint to the point that even if I don't love it, I paint to the point that I don't hate it.
Right.
And I paint to the point that I am proud of the work, that my name is on it. It's like, okay, it can go out into the world, and if it's my name on it, I'm okay with that. But it doesn't have to be my own personal aesthetic. I am painting for someone else. I'm offering my gift, my energy, my color to other people to enjoy it, for them to connect with it. I can only do but so much to offer it to them, and if it speaks to them, that's my offering to them.
Right.
Is for them to connect with it. It's not my job to make the piece perfect. My job is to make it perfect for that person. And you don't have any control over that. You don't know what they're looking for. You don't know what they're going to connect with. You just have to have the know-how to say, you know what? This is good. This feels good for me. I'm proud of this. If someone saw this and my name is on it, I'm okay with that. I don't have to love it, but I don't hate it. and then just let it go.
But
And
what-
then move on to the next piece.
Yeah, but what is perfect anyway? So,
Right.
you know, I mean, what is that? Because it's, you know, when you're creating a piece, when you're creating something, you're bringing something new that hasn't previously existed. So, what are you comparing perfect to?
Right.
You know, so that's, you know, you're comparing like this piece needs to be perfect. That's your own head, and that's your own voice that you probably, I would consider quiet. You know, maybe you need counseling.
Let me just add that pricing stuff not for sale. The galleries I work with will not show anything that's not for sale. So I know in my studio, you come to my studio, everything's for sale. I mean, I don't care what it is. It's mom portrait. Offer me something, you go for it. I'm not married to any of my pieces. So don't put anything not for sale unless it's
All my work is for sale.
unless it's already sold and they just showing it.
Right.
Before send them out first and then.
Yeah, I have one question.
So,
I wanted to ask,
no, hold on, one quick second, please. He wants to respond to.
So, I would say, every day, I'll just say this, going into painting, just be more intentional. Being more intentional and working through whatever process is in your mind. He said what is perfect. So you have to define in your mind what's perfect, what's not perfect. And how can I put this? It's been times I painted things and I hated it. I didn't like it at all. But then the more I started doing it, I wasn't doing it for me. I was doing it for somebody else. To pick it back off what you're saying. I want to say, and this is crazy to even say this, but I want to say 50% of the pieces that I sell are pieces I don't even like. And maybe about, I want to say last year, I was in a gallery in Wilmington, Delaware called the Soul Firm, and 25% of the pieces I sold were pieces I really didn't like I really wasn't feeling them, but it connected with people differently, and they brought it. So sometimes when you painting things that you might not quite comprehend and understand. So sometimes it's almost like just hold it at stock. And when somebody comes into the studio, or when you're about to show in the gallery and they got to select pieces to put up or whatever the case may be, you'll be surprised at what people will choose. It might not be what you actually like, but that goes back to attention, being intentional. Because if you go into a piece every single time being intentional, you will never fail. Because you were trying to put a certain energy and trying to get something out, and that right there is divine to me. Because everything in this universe is somehow, some way connected, in some way, shape, or form. Even us as human beings are connected. So that's intentional. God made everything intentional, and God doesn't make no mistakes. So as an artist, there is nothing as a mistake.
One more.
I just want to say something. Sometimes you just have to look at your work as a dialogue between you and that piece. And when you start putting it out there, that piece is going to respond to you. So you're responding to it. It's as you create it, it's responding to you. There's no such thing as a perfect dialogue. It's going to be what it is. It's going to have a personality all its own. And it's important for you to be able to accept that. Because you can't force someone to have a different personality or the one that you think it should have, right? So if you kind of loosen up and let go and say, just step back, because you're so busy trying to make it what you want it to be, what you think it should be, you're not letting it be itself. And I think that's really important, to recognize that you're in a dialogue with yourself, with other people who are going to be looking at it. And you don't know what they're going to think. Let it go.
Just real quickly, so we have a question in the back.
Yeah. Are you ready for me?
No, not yet. She wants to just.
Oh, well, I'm so glad that I came. I mean, I came primarily to support my son, who is Nick. and very proud of him. But it's just been a wonderful experience to hear all of these artists. And one of the things that I was thinking is, I get the feeling that sometimes the art's coming through you, as opposed to you just, you're the center of attention. Right. I think the art is, and you're kind of the vessel, right? You're kind of bringing it into the world. And that's the impression that I get really from everybody here. Yeah. And it's everything that's happened to you in your life. And it's just kind of coming out. And this is how you're expressing it. So I appreciate all of your gifts. I just wanted to ask Nick, even though he's my son, just a quick question. I know that you're a self-taught musician as well. And I just want to know, because you paint to music, how does that history of your having taught yourself music, does that inform the ways things come out on the canvas for you?
Well, when I was learning to play music, I tried learning traditionally, like I tried learning sheet music and things like that, but it never worked for me. I always became very frustrated. So I started playing by ear, and I played for about 8 years. I was in a few bands, and it was just by playing by ear. I never learned how to read sheet music. And I guess in relation to art, it's that it was something that it feels natural. It doesn't feel forced ever. And to kind of respond to your question, like what is perfect, and I respect everyone's answers, but I feel if you are not making the art for yourself, there's a level of fulfillment that won't be there for you.
That's true.
You can take it from the perspective of making it for somebody. That's a beautiful thing for you to create for somebody else. But when you create for yourself and you're creating work that speaks, or like my mother said, comes through you, you're giving birth in a way. Right. So to have that kind of creation and not really know where it came from, kind of like how I made music, I think that will always be an element of like surprise and wonder in your life. So always just try to create for yourself, in my opinion, but also it's always an experiment, basically.
Thank you for your patience. Gentlemen, question?
My question is for everybody, right down the line. What makes great art?
Great intention.
I can go first. I got a question for you. Define what's great.
Now, I mean, I have my opinion on it, but I asked you the question first. I'll be able to talk about it, but I asked you this question first, so I don't want you to be informed by me.
What makes
the viewer, whatever the viewer decides what's great for them, in my opinion.
I guess
I'm part of the panel, but as well.
I asked that question because, you know, we have these people they're called critics. Yeah. And they write about art. So I'm asking you, what makes great art?
I think great art is about connection. And when you think about a critic, it's just they didn't connect with that piece of art. That doesn't mean that it's not great, it's not great for them. But it doesn't mean that it's not a great piece of art, it's just a work that they did not connect with. So you take, as an artist, you take it with a grain of salt. If you get a bad critique, they give you negative feedback, it's just not something it's something they did not connect with. It's not that your work is bad, it's just, it didn't resonate with them. So I think great art as a viewer is something that you know the moment that you've connected with something that drives you to go into your pocket and pull out money to grab your card. It's something that reminds you of your grandmother, reminds you of a moment that drives you, you've connected. It's something that makes you smile. It's something that may make you tear up. That's that moment of connection. That's what makes it great. It gives you an experience.
It's an individual thing.
But it's an individual thing. I don't think everybody feels the same thing. Some people see one of the great works and think, not so much.
Like I said, the viewer. But Nick wants
to build on that, I feel art is a language, and in ways it's like a dog whistle. you either hear it or you don't. And for those who do, then I think great art is art that you think about before you go to sleep and when you wake up. It's something that stayed with you throughout the whole day. And it's something that you thought about in your first moments of the next day. And something that impacts on how you view the world. And sometimes great art, and I learned this through working with Justin a lot and us talking about art, is that some great art shocks you. It makes you uncomfortable, but not uncomfortable in a way that's any kind of like hateful or anything like that. It awakens you to something you haven't thought before. And whether or not that's a radical thought or something that you buried yourself, it feels new as soon as you see it.
Josh, you want to think about that?
So, a principle I was always taught, especially through Jerry Gann, for those of you who don't know, he always said, speak your truth through your art. And I always felt that that was the most impactful thing, because speaking your truth is not necessarily a verbal thing. It's more representing what's not able to be said from inside. So I think great art is also to be viewed from the artist creating the work themselves. Because if you don't view your work as great, how can you expect anything from a viewer if you have no love for what you're doing?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it's a tricky question when you really think about it. I like to look at it from a historical standpoint, because there's been many masters and great artists that have put great work out that were never recognized in their time period for it being great. So when you look at art and you look back at the masters and you look back at great works of art, the Sistine Chapel, things of this sort, they transcend time. And it doesn't matter what era you come from and what generation you come from, it still has that effect on people that it had when it was originally created. Sometimes, in some instances it doesn't. Sometimes it may miss a generation, sometimes it may miss 2 generations until it's discovered or rediscovered. So I think, with art, I think what makes it art, I think art is transcendent. Simply put, art has to be transcendent.
You just want to say something?
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure this out. First of all, we're talking more about art here than just art. I mean, art is the medium, but the thought process from the creator to the receiver is a whole broad, creative attachment thing. And that's why you buy a piece because you love it. Now you got to go where you want to put it, because you want a certain feeling where you put it as you walk through that room. When it's combined with something else, it's I guess as far as the critics are concerned, hey, it's almost like, who cares? I mean, basically, if I love it, that's all I need to know.
I think great art makes you feel something that you cannot forget, or think something you can't forget.
As you see it. Yeah.
Of course, I'm talking about, it's personal.
That's right. That's right.
2 Richard Serras that I saw at MoMA. One was this huge metal sculptures that he did, which I thought were wonderful. Then I went upstairs and saw work that he had done when he was young. And the hair stood on the back of my neck. I felt like I was being attacked. I hated it. But I had such a visceral response to it, I had to go back. It was like, okay, so why do you feel so angry about this piece of work? I hated it. I mean, it was like, really, where is he coming from? So I went back and I spent time with the work, and I realized why I was feeling what I was feeling. I never forgot either piece, because they elicited tremendous emotional responses from me. One on one end of the spectrum, the other on the other end of the spectrum. So I think as an artist, I want people to feel something. I mean, that's the goal, whether I like it or not, or whether even they like it or not. What I want is for them to feel something. They could hate it, which is a response, is a feeling. They could love it, but to be indifferent to it, I don't feel as if I've done my job.
I think it's something about one thing I just wanted to add. No, he was sorry. And then you. Something about.
To answer his question,
you got help.
To answer this question, I think great art for me is a few things. It's intentional, unintentional, and emotion. Emotions because you're giving off certain kind of energy, and that energy is going to connect with somebody. And when they connect with that, they connect with either the story that they're interpreting in their mind or our real life situation. Like even in the back, this piece that we behind this, it says, "I miss Obama." Somebody might see that and they might feel so emotionally attached to that. And sometimes even doing stuff like that, that might have not even been his intentions to even put "I miss Obama." Might be like, you know what? Let's go there, or that matches something like that. So the unintentional sometimes is like, as an abstract artist, you might be painting something and you might do a splatter, but you didn't mean to do it. Yeah. But the person that brought the piece is like so in love with this unintentional thing that you did. So I think that's what makes great art. Even looking at like Jean-Michel Basquiat work and seeing some of the things that he did and some of the things that he was like saying in his work. Sometimes those things were intentional and unintentional. But I think that's what makes great work.
But if you leave it on the canvas, it's intentional.
One last.
Yeah, in there. Yeah, in there.
Right.
You could be painting. I could be painting the picture.
Yeah, and you could make a mistake.
On accident.
Right,
something
exactly.
spills.
Right.
But it's supposed to be there?
Well, wait a minute. If you leave it there, it's supposed to be there.
One final statement before we move to the next question. Yeah, one statement about this question.
I think it's an important question to ask, not just for upcoming artists, but also going to these largely recognized institutions, of asking yourselves, why have these works been chosen and put up on the wall for us to view as great artists, right? I think it's important to note all the artists that have been washed away from those that have taken away from disturbing cultures. I think it's important also to kind of question how these artists that we now recognize as the historical canon of artwork, why we have been kind of given only this viewpoint of these artists. How did they get there? Were they exploited after death to be seen as the collectible pieces now? To separate the personal from the business is also a point to think about what are collectors looking for in terms of collecting artwork, work that they will see risen. And a lot of that changes between three-dimensional work and 2D work. A lot of people that collect oil paintings are looking for that juicy quality in works, just things that certain notes and characteristics they're looking for in terms of why they're collecting a certain piece. So I think it's important to ask yourself those questions of why is this piece great? But also in terms of why we're given these terms of like the Sistine Chapel, amazing work, right? But that wasn't just worked on by one person, and especially now with a lot of the artists now where they've got this fame and notoriety, and we love their work, but a lot of their work is sourced out and created in other galleries. And they're no longer Jeff Koons, Kende Wiley, who I'm connected with a lot of the time with people, but I don't see myself connected with him at all, otherwise being a black man. Because he, again, has no connection to his work anymore. He ships his work out to Japan and has people create his work for him, which has been done over the course of history of years, right? But that also goes with the conversation of now, does he lose his greatness, right? As he does not consider that anymore? So, just things to think about. I think what you're talking about is more of a completed idealistic, right? Am I complete? Is this work complete enough for me to send out? But I think they're all accurate in terms of you not just separating the business side of it, which is super important if you're trying to sell work. You need to understand how to sell work, but not to dissociate the personal side of it. You're creating work for yourself first, right? And then you are giving this work out to others. And if that means that you need to, separate the two, have work for yourself and have work that you want to sell, I think that's super.
Well, we have time for one more question for the panel.
I'm a creative adjacent, so I love to be around creatives. So as a marketing business person, I'm curious in your journey, wherever you are, what you wish you knew about broadening and raising your visibility, or what you thought the most important thing was that you did that has impacted your getting your voice heard and growing your awareness of your work.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again?
No.
Can you paraphrase?
Yeah.
There's a question.
Hold on, who got the question?
Somebody get it?
Something that you wish you had known, like coming into art.
Marketing wise.
That kind of helps to promote your visibility, your work. Something that you wish you'd known.
Anyone?
I'm going to try not to answer immediately because I had come from an advertising and marketing background. So I think I kind of have a skewed.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was just thinking the same thing because, I come from a business background, so the whole marketing of art and, that's just something that, I don't know if it came naturally, it's just something that I learned from coming out of the business world. So I know how to market the art. I know how to research demographics. I have a lot of information on people who collect my artwork. Like I can tell you the demographics of my collectors. And
So, I think for people that are not that, it's, you love to just do the work, and it may have been a person or an experience or something that you fell into that was most pivotal, or a big mistake that you look back and you're like, wow, I wish I knew or did this differently 10 years ago or 5 years ago or 15 years ago.
I think, and it's a marketing thing. I think it's important to pace yourself in a way. I dove in body first into the art world. If nothing else, I would tell, and I say this to people all the time, do not do New York Art Expo. Like the big art fair in the city, don't do it as a solo artist. If you are going to do it, go with a gallery that brings you there. Do not pay to participate in any of those booths.
Right.
Don't. It was the biggest drop of $6,000 that I have ever done.
Wow.
I've heard that.
Well, I think the bottom line question is, Justin, how did your piece get into this gallery? What was the path?
So I think it was just the basis of, like Joel said before, me being a youngster for the exposure. It's a much, I like to think of my work as a much different style than has been seen in this gallery before.
So what did you have a couple pieces in your portfolio and knock on the door and said, Laura, I'd like to be here? What did you do?
Huh?
That's a possibility.
What'd you say?
I'm serious. I'm curious. I think it's
I
more.
know, but how did you see his work?
Well, I met Justin in Harlem Fantasy Space, right? With Nick. They had Open Doors. And then we stayed in touch. I think he had a show at the library, West Orange Library.
Public Library.
Yeah, and I was the only one who came. No, but he's a young artist. He's learning. He's at Kane University, so he's serious about his craft. And I feel that we should support young artists. I've gone through some doors in my career, and I bring people with me. I have no problem any level of art, even outsiders, even craft people. People need to see their work. I told him to come to Akwaaba, and I said, you have to network. Come to Akwaaba, talk to the people here, talk to Laura, talk to Ray, and she decided to give him a show, or put him in a show. That's how that came with him. Same thing with you. We met as well. Jerome. I just met Stephen, and I just met Walter.
So everybody needs to know you.
I would say when I was younger that I wish I had as I get older, you know, I'm like, you're gonna see me. You're gonna see me. I don't care what I gotta do, but you're gonna see me. Whether if I'm on Instagram and there's a gallery that I like, I'm gonna tag them. Yeah. You're gonna see me, and pretty much that's how this happened. You know, I tag, see me, see my work, and next thing you know, my DMs is like, give me a call. And here I am. But as now, like I said, I'm bending people's ear. Like, what are you doing? And things of that nature. I'm keeping contact with folks. Things that I haven't done when I was younger. You know, like I said, I'm being more bold. And it's just like I said, right now, I don't care. My intentions are to give you my vibe. My intention is for you to see my work, feel my vibe, buy my work. You know, and say, wow. And that's it. That's what I do.
All right, well, we'll close it out with you.
Last point. So I think a big thing about getting yourself out there, just from a young person's perspective, is to jump off the train of being in that esoteric mindset of the artist, because then you kind of stop yourself short instead of taking your work seriously, because you're so caught up in that representation of yourself as the artist that the work doesn't necessarily follow. So
okay,
that's how I view it.
Well, I guess we're gonna close it at 7.
This
is it.
The question was the mistake, right?
Not necessarily the learning. I don't think of anything as a mistake.
I'm 27, haven't been doing this for too long. I started in 2018, as far as being a professional artist and taking it full time. I wish that I would have been more proactive in getting to galleries. I had a real bad, I had negative thoughts about galleries. I actually hated them. I didn't know nothing about art, but when I watched John Michelle documentary, I was like, I fell in love with him because I connected with him on so many different levels. And it was a few statements that was told in the documentary where it was like, when he passed away, he became more famous. When he passed away, he sold more art. And one of his struggles was being accepted. So in my mind, I'm like, these galleries and critics then killed a legend and a hero. Why would I ever want to be a part of institutions? But now, being a part of Akwaaba Gallery and just experiencing everything I experienced, I love it. My perception of what I thought about galleries has definitely changed. And I really believe it's about not all galleries, it's about finding the right one for you as an artist. So coming into this, I wish I would have been a little bit more open, because me, I come from a small city, and I got the hustler mentality. Like I don't want no handouts. I'm gonna go get it on my own. So a lot of my solo exhibitions, I throw them together myself, and I always sold work and always been packed out, always sold out. Coming from that like hustler mentality, I'm like, you know what? I need to level up and start exposing myself a little bit more outside of where I'm from. So my mentor that used to watch me in the studio, she told me about this gallery. I don't know how she found out about it or whatever the case may be, but she brought me up here and I met her, and it's been love ever since. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Lauren. Laura, you want to close up?
Wow, full house. Thank you everyone for coming out. Thank you all the artists who participated in the show. Thank you very much. And for anyone who's came in later, we're having our first anniversary show on February 15th from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. So I'm inviting you, please come out and celebrate with us. We're opening a new show on that night called One Rule. So come out and celebrate with us.
Yes, yes.
Well, of course, don't